Hey, small groups. It is week 2 of our Commit series. I am here with Pastor Scott for our starter video. A little bit of a new format. Give people an opportunity to hear your heart, maybe get their questions prepped. And so today, one of the ways that this really jumped out to me, and hopefully for the groups too, is this idea of the 5 experiences, the 5 common experiences you talked about.
Right.
When you think about that, what are a couple of those experiences in your life that really stand out? Just to prime the pump for our people at home a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody, right? So for me, like I look back over like a lot of years. I think it's probably on a bunch of different levels, but I remember as a kid, maybe this is an educational experience-ish, or maybe this doesn't fit into any of those 5. But
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, I grew up in church, so I grew up under a lot of sermons and stuff like that. I was actually kind of in and out of church, but when I was in, I would listen to guys preach. And for some reason, I took this interest in that, and I would be like, "That's kind of boring." Or I would think he could have told that story better, or I would hear a story here and think, "Man, I could use that somehow." And I don't think it was like an arrogance thing, like you're no good and I am, and I'm like 12 and I'm telling you how to preach. But there was something about that. So I think it was like maybe a little bit of this. Maybe it's educational experience because I would hear other people, and then I would start to like think, well, if I was ever going to talk to people, what might be some stories I could tell? So then I would start like kind of looking for stories, and so that would probably be one of them under educational. And then if you want to get like really crazy, when it comes to the spiritual side of stuff, like we talked about spiritual experiences really help you serve.
Sure, absolutely.
And so you get yourself in a charged spiritual environment, which I think if you're a follower of Jesus, ideally every day should be a charged spiritual environment, but the fact of it is not, because my car broke down or this relationship went sideways, whatever. But I try as much as I can to stay in that place where it's a charged spiritual experience. So that's why we're big on life journaling and praying and listening to the Lord. And so the whole idea with spiritual experiences are, as you have those, a lot of times they're not just so that you can feel good about yourself. You know, like, oh, I got the little Jesus goosebumps, so that's great, you go on.
Yeah.
But a lot of times God will use these deep spiritual experiences for a ministry time later. So one of the parts in a deep spiritual ministry experience is that you learn how to listen to the voice of the Lord. Okay, so I'm gonna go like if you've been traveling with the Lord for a lot, you know, if you're like brand new, you may be like, this is just kind of weird to me. But I feel like I've not always, but I feel like I sometimes can get a good beat on what the Lord's saying, right? So I have a good spiritual experience of I'm meeting with the Lord every day in life journaling. I'm praying a lot and stuff. And then when I get in another environment, I lean on that. So let me give you an example. I was at, I do some work with worship leaders and that from around the nation and the world, really. But as we were at an event, and I'm watching the worship band, and they're like kind of warming up, and I'm watching this girl who's a guitar player, who I had met like once or twice before. And as soon as I saw her, I felt like the Lord said, the burden that she's carrying is not her own. Like, she's not supposed to carry that burden. Okay. Just like that.
Okay.
Now, the only reason that I could hear that is because I had spiritual experiences where I knew how to listen to the Lord.
Right, yeah.
So I had a spiritual experience. I knew how to listen to the Lord. I felt like He was right there. I'm so like, what am I supposed to do with that? So here's where it became fun. So here's how I served in that context. They were packing up and they were all done, and she started to walk out, and I hollered her name, and she turned around, and I said, hey, and this is what I usually say.
Right, yeah.
I usually say, I think the Lord wants me to say this to you, but I'm not sure if it's the Lord or if it's me.
Okay, yeah.
Because I usually qualify that, because a lot of times I don't always know.
Sure, yeah.
But I'm like, I think, and if I had a good mentor one time who just showed me how to do that, and it's like, if it's not the Lord, okay, but I need to be obedient in it. So anyway, she turned around and she's like, yeah, and I said, hey, I don't know if this is from the Lord or not, but I felt like He said that the burden you're carrying, you're not supposed to carry. Mm. And she just like, her eyes got like super big.
Wow.
And she said, I know exactly what you're talking about. And she turned around and walked out. And I was like, that's right. That's how it's done. You know, I'm like, yeah, there's a win. It doesn't always happen like that. You know, don't think that it's always like that. But when it does, it's amazing. Now, but again, the only reason that I could minister in that way is because I'd had a spiritual experience before where the Lord said, this is what I'm saying to her. And so when you start operating that kind of stuff, it becomes really, really fun.
Yeah.
So I do think that the Lord doesn't waste any of our experiences at all. So everything that we're experiencing, good and bad, educational, vocational, all that kind of stuff, He's going to help us to serve. Just a matter of finding the right avenue.
Well, and even in hearing you talk a little bit, it's less about you in any of those things pursuing something and more about God wiring you in a way where He's speaking and allowing you to connect some dots.
Yeah.
Right? So passions, proclivities, inclinations, all of that kind of came together when you're talking about like the educational experience. Oh man, I'm just naturally thinking about how to weave, communicate.
Right.
Or even in this case, with the experience conference where you're talking to the worship leader, that's God coming to you. And so it's not like we have to chase Him and try to serve. Like He's coming and meeting us in that space, calling us into are we paying attention? Are we available? Are we aware?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Nick, because a lot of times we're not aware because we just don't know. We're our own we're our own worst critics, and we don't realize how bad we are at stuff.
Yeah.
And we also don't realize how good we are at stuff.
That's right. Yep.
And so I've had people pull me aside when I was younger and say, "Man, when you did that really," and I was like, "Really?" And so I didn't know. I mean, as a preacher now, like I didn't know when I was younger that I was any good at that. But as I did a little bit of that, I heard from other people, and I'm like, "Oh, you think I'm good?" Because I'm not really sure that I am. Then there were some other areas where people were like, "Might want to try something else."
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. And so as we're getting ready to talk about this, tonight, throughout the week, is there anything that you would say to our groups as they're digging into these experiences and trying to hopefully confront some hard realities about the barriers in between them and serving? As you prep for this message, as you've communicated, as you've prayed over it, what would maybe be like some B-sides or stuff that maybe we didn't hear this weekend that you just want to communicate to our groups this week?
Yeah, I think the danger is to know all this and just to do absolutely nothing. That's a huge danger. So the hardest thing, like in your small group, the hardest part of small group is the first time you walked across the threshold of that house. Because you walked in all nervous, I don't know these people. The hardest part of serving is doing it the first time if you're serving here in our context. And I think we serve all during the day in different areas, but to sign up for or to say yes to or to jump into, and I'll say it's a soft place to land around here. There's I'll tell you this, if you jump into a ministry here and it's not soft, it's hard, and they're mean, you come talk to Nick and I, and the next video will be a little bit different because we'll bring some people in, right? I would also say that this is, I really think, one of the highest privileges that we have, because the Lord, for whatever reason, has chosen to move His church and is chosen to move the gospel through the church. And so the plan for Jesus saving the world is actually you. And you're like, that's a bad plan. But it's actually God working through you. And so Jesus is actually inviting us to join Him in redeeming the world and saving the world. And so I was when I was in Bible college, it was the late 80s, and we had a pastor that came in from a local church. He was a big deal pastor. He came in and he taught a class. It was an evening class. And he was talking about recruiting and people serving, and this student who was like, he just thought he knew a little bit more than the speaker. And so he said, "Hey, it seems like you are trying to manipulate people into serving."
Yeah.
You're just manipulating people into serving. That's all you're trying to do is to get free labor. And this pastor basically, I don't think he took his coat off, but it was on, and he's like, and he said, "Listen to me, son."
Yeah.
He said, "I am calling people into one of the highest callings to open up the giftings in their life and join Jesus in what He's doing in the world."
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's exactly right. And so this is not about just getting tasks done. This is about seeing the kingdom move and this great invitation to it. And so jump in and risk it and do it.
Absolutely. Hey, I hope you guys will take that seriously. It's scary. It's not always easy, but let's jump in as a community and get it done. Scott, thank you for making some time. We're going to go jump into the second service here, but we'll see you guys next week.